I'm here today with Steve Wilson. It's July 2nd, 2007, about 3:15 p.m. at Stonewall, Columbus, at 1160 North High Street in Columbus, Ohio. Could you state your name, please?
My name is Steve Wilson.
And where were you born at, Steve?
I was born in Tiffin, Ohio.
Okay, and what is your birth date?
I was born on May 26, 1961.
And what is your ethnic or racial background?
I'm a Caucasian.
All right. And do you have any siblings?
I have one sister who's a year younger than I am.
All right. When you were growing up, did your mother or father work outside the home?
My father worked, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom until I was about 12 years old, maybe 11.
All right. And what did your father do for a living?
He was an inspector for the railroads.
All right. What is your earliest memory?
My earliest memory? Wow. I remember taking baths in the sink on the farm. Those are probably some of my earliest memories. I grew up on a farm for a few years when I was young, and spent a lot of time there, growing up during summers, and things like that.
All right. Where did you attend elementary, middle, and high school at?
My family, they bounced around a bit during my early years, but by the time I was 5 years old, we'd settled in a small farm community called South Charleston, Ohio. And it was a population of about 1,200 people, and I went to Miami View Elementary School and then on to Southeastern High School. Had a graduating class of 99 students, although the last year and a half I moved with my mother after they had divorced and attended Springfield North High School for the last year and a half.
All right. When you were a kid, do you remember anyone that you looked up to as a hero, either an actual living person or some sort of a television or cartoon person?
The heroes were like people in my community, really. I delivered the newspaper at a real early age, and spend a lot of time with some of the older people that were on the routes, and would listen to their oral histories about growing up in Ohio and things like that. And those were the people that I had always admired a lot, because I saw the values that they had in community and family. I wasn't exposed to a whole lot of people where I grew up. So.
All right. How old were you when you first realized that you were gay?
Always. I never really ever had any thought about it. There wasn't anything at all. I just always grew up liking boys. There were, young boys that I hung out with when I was young, and, we would engage in homosexual activities, but, I don't think that's unique to gay men at all. It's just boys being boys. It was probably, I was maybe about 12 years old, I think, when there was an episode on MASH, the old TV program, where the soldier had been assaulted, and the show kind of skirted around the whole issue, but I kind of empathized, with this character. And I remember at the end of the show, they actually uttered the H word, a homosexual. And I didn't know what it was, but I ran to the dictionary after the show was over. I looked it up, and it was like, wow, I know I've got a label now. I just knew that was it. And it was maybe a year later when I actually came out to my mother, maybe a year and a half. I was 13 at the time.
Was that the first person that you discussed this with?
Yes.
And tell me about that.
It was, it wasn't my volunteering information. I had been going into Springfield with my mom sometimes when she would go to work. So I was still living in South Charleston at the time. And she was working downtown, and, there was a drugstore nearby that sold Playboy and Playgirl magazines. And so I managed to sneak down to the drugstore over the course of a number of months and acquire a little collection of Playgirl magazines. And when I would buy the magazines, I'd always pull some nail polish or lipstick off the counter and just say I was buying these things for my mom. And I always would...
Pretty ingenious.
I would leave the lipstick or the nail polish, I'd leave it in her car. And of course it was always whorish red, just an ungodly color. But she never knew where they were coming from. And one day she found my collection of magazines under my bed. And the first question she asked me, very accusingly, "Are these your father's magazines?" That was kind of funny, but I confessed. I said no. I didn't know the gay word then, but I confessed I was a homosexual. And she took it very calmly, very cool. We talked and talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. And, she told me never to wear her clothes. She told me, offered to buy Playboy magazines for me to see if I would like to look at those pictures instead. Asked me if, any of the other boys I was hanging out with were gay also. So we had a long talk, and she seemed, rather accepting at the moment. And then she cried nonstop for the next 3 days, nonstop. So it was kind of rough, and the rest of my time living in the house was not really so easy. But when she found out that, when I told her how I bought the magazines and was leaving these objects in her car, I think that caused some of the tears too, because she kind of broke down because she had been seeing a married man at the time, and she thought that this guy's wife had been getting in her car and leaving her this whore makeup. So she was greatly relieved to know that it wasn't her husband's wife leaving these things, but she wasn't so happy that it was her son.
When you were a kid, do you ever remember hearing people talk about somebody who was gay, or talk about somebody who you later realized what they were describing was them being gay?
My grandfather, he was just a nasty racist. It didn't matter who it was. If they weren't, a farmer, he was going to have unkind things to say. So I don't feel particularly singled out by him, but at times I would hear him make, derogatory comments about, feminine men that he might see on television.
Do you remember the language that he was
No, I really don't. They're not words that you hear like tossed about today. It would be more like, just talking about how, he looks like, he ought to be named Bonnie or something like that. Just kind of ridiculous things.
When you were a kid, did you know anyone else that also identified themselves as being gay?
Oh, no. When I was a sophomore in high school, still in the farm town, I confided in a couple of guys there that I thought were also. But, it was a very difficult environment, and they didn't want to have any of this conversation at all. Along about that time, was when, my mom had moved to Springfield, and I started hanging out with kids in the big city, you could say. So I met some other, gay kids at other schools, but none of the gay kids in my school would be around me, because I was fairly open about my orientation when I migrated over to Springfield, to the schools there. So that made me a bit of an outcast, and I was subject to, a lot of taunts and abuse and things like that. The other gay kids that were there just, were terrified, except for the one big lesbian that was on the basketball team. She adored me.
When you said that you were pretty out when you went over to Springfield to go to school, what do you mean by that?
I moved there in midterm, so right after the Christmas break, and they were getting ready to have their Sadie Hawkins dance in February. And this girl who was deemed like, the beauty of my class, that all the guys, were after her, and she was rather aloof to everybody. She invited me to the dance, and I turned her down and told her it was because I was gay.
Wow.
So I was pretty out there.
That must have traveled around school pretty fast.
Pretty quickly, yeah.
What made you be so open?
It was my parents. There's no doubt about that. It was my folks. They got together. They were still kids when they had me. My mom was 15. My father was 17, and it was a shotgun marriage. She was from a strict Southern Baptist home, and he was from a strict Jehovah's Witness home. And when they got together, I guess they kind of rebelled against this, and they brought my sister and I up basically without any religion at all. And whenever we would ask about it, they would say, oh, well, there are these churches, there's some nice Methodists up the street. If you want to go to church with them. But religion was never part of our upbringing at all, so they didn't have any of those kinds of issues to deal with in my mind. And the other thing was that my parents were also always encouraged us to be who we are, and always speak what's on your mind, what you're feeling. So even though I knew I was different, I didn't feel any shame in expressing who I was at all. And that was just how I had been brought up to be. And so it was a little shocking to see their attitude when I expressed, who I really was. My mom, like I said, she took it very hard at first. And we had a rough, few years while I was living with her in Springfield. And, I remember her, the only straight friend that I had, I remember her coming home one day and her throwing him out of the house and screaming that she didn't know any faggots in the house. Which my friend thought was just, outrageously funny, of course. But he was like, he was pretty much the only male friend that I had while I was in school. He was straight. His older brother was gay, so he was a good guy. But other than that, I didn't really have any other real friends in high school, when I had moved over to Springfield. A couple of girls that I hung out with. And then, I mentioned at the other high school that was in town, I knew a lot of gay kids there. Through involvement with community theater events and stuff like that. My father, I came out to him when I was 16. And in the meantime, I had come out to my sister and my aunt, and, neither of them had any issues at all. And in fact, they both asked me if I thought my father was gay too. Which is still an unresolved issue, I think. But when I told him, he had one thing to say, and he said, "Don't let anyone ever find out." And that was the only thing that was ever said for years until I was a student at Ohio State. I may have been in grad school this time, and he had come over one day, and it was like spring quarter, or nice day, and everybody's walking around half naked on campus. And he almost rear-ended somebody because he was looking too much, he said. And then he very matter-of-factly turned at me and said, "I see you checking out all the guys too." And with that utterance, sort of things we're fine. But it took him a long time. I've been coming home with boyfriends to family reunions and, had, been very out, with my family for many years before, he finally came to that point.
So what sort of a reaction did you get from your peers for being so out and open when you were in school?
Well, of course, I got called a faggot everywhere I went. Everywhere I went. Every time I'm walking down the hallway, or it was not a good environment at all. I was taunted all the time.
Any teachers or administrators do anything about it?
Oh no. I guess I had a teacher who befriended me, an older gay man, and also there was another teacher who was also a gay man, but he really wanted to molest me rather than counsel me or help me. So that wasn't such a good thing. I just reminded him that I was a no-no, and had to walk away from that. And I had other gay teachers too, but and actually some of them were also involved in the community theater and things like that. So I would see them and socialize with them a lot, when I was still in high school, and that helped a lot, because I had other gay people to be around, rather than being harassed by everybody else that I'm around all day long.
Did you date when you were in high school?
Yes. Oh yeah. I dated first guy who I had met was a boy in Dayton, and no, actually Ricky would have been the second boy I met. The first guy I was hanging out with, his name was Marty, and Marty he had issues to deal with, and so when I split up with him, he started going around the state putting up my home phone number in the stalls at truck stops. So my parents, of course, were getting all these calls, from truckers wanting to, fuck whoever answers the phone. It didn't matter. And of course, my mom, was always accusing me of doing this because, I was just a dirty, filthy faggot, And I kept saying, no, Mom, it's Marty. But she wasn't having that. But anyway, I met my second boyfriend from one of those phone calls. He was a young kid. He was like my age. We were both 17. And his name was Ricky, and he lived in Dayton. And he had a beautiful afro, and we became really good friends. I would drive down there frequently, and we'd hang out and smoke dope, and sometimes go get a hotel room somewhere, and sometimes we'd just go to the park. And we had a lot of good times together, and he didn't know any other gay folks either. So by this time, I had met like other gay people in Springfield outside of school teachers and things. And, got invited to a New Year's Eve party one time, and invited Ricky to come to that. And he took off with some other guy that night, which didn't bother me at all. I was happy to see the connection, but everybody's like in my face trying to make it an issue for me. But Ricky was a good guy. I adored him. Don't know what happened to him. He's disappeared in the past. Yeah, there were maybe a couple other dates I had in high school, but that would just be like going out to a movie once or something, and then they'd be scared. Really, it's just they talking about gay things and being so open about being gay it was too problematic for most people in that community.
So what year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated, I was in the class of 1979. I left halfway through my senior year and started at Ohio State. And see, by this time, everybody in my family knew about my orientation. My grandmother was the last person that I told. I told her shortly after, my father. And knowing that she was very strict Southern Baptist, and I was always very, very close to her. That was why I waited so long, because I was afraid of how the reaction would be. But she took it very cool. She's like, well, of course, I know this already. And she says, why did you tell me last? She said, Stephen, when God had the Bible written, there weren't very many people on this planet, so he needed a man to be with a woman. But today, there are plenty of people here, so it's okay, my son.
Wow.
And it was a non-issue with her. Now, it helped that I was, her first grandson and her most adored grandson. So if I'd been some other grandson, I don't know how it would have gone over. But, I was the one that she had always been doting on. And so for her, it was a very accepting moment. Yeah.
So what was it like coming to Columbus?
When I got here, I started in the spring quarter, and of course the first thing I did was run to the Gay Activist Alliance, which I don't think I went to their first meeting, but I probably went to their second meeting of that quarter. And I had seen other homosexuals before on television. I lived, South Charleston, Springfield. They're not too far from Antioch College, which sadly is closing next year. But, at Yellow Springs, they were, a pretty liberal school. And I remember one time they had a program where they were going to have live homosexuals on TV. And so I snuck a little portable into my bedroom, and hiding somewhere in the dark to watch this program. And I was pretty horrified by what I saw. The people that, were there to represent, gays on television for the first time that I ever knew of were, very stereotypical, very unkept, very unprofessional, did not speak well, did not look well. And I was mortified because I thought, wow, is this what gay people are really like? Because before that, all I had known about other gays really, than the folks that I had known were things that I had read in the public library, which of course called me a sick deviant. And my uncle had a Joy of Sex book that I, of course looked up, homosexuals in there, and was informed that my whole life would be nothing other than dropping notes written on toilet paper under bathroom stalls. So I was excited to be able to see some gays on TV, and that frightened me. So when I got to Ohio State to go to the Gay Alliance meeting there, it was kind of exciting, but it was a little frightening at the same time too, because I didn't know what kind of folks I would encounter. By this time I had been to New York a couple of times and met, other gay folks there also. So I wasn't really that worried, but still, walking into that kind of an environment, you never know. And the people that were there at the meeting, they weren't all students, but they were all gay. And there were, older people, younger people, a whole mishmash of white men.
Where was the meeting at?
It was held at the OSU Student Union.
And how did you find out about it?
It was announced and listed in the paper, probably in the Lantern,
Okay.
or, well, maybe not. Maybe I might have actually looked them up in the student union and saw what time their meetings were. I mean, I was actively seeking them out, so it wasn't like I waited around to hear something. And while I was there, that was where I met Craig Covey, because he was the president of the Activist Alliance then. He was a senior getting ready to graduate. And that was my first real, kind of experience with, the political issues, regarding gays. I had dealt with all the societal issues for a long time, growing up gay. That was the first time that, the whole issue of politics and policy and things like that I ever heard addressed anywhere. So that was very enlightening.
What do you recall? What some of the issues were that the Gay Activist Alliance was concerned about at that time?
Wow. You know, I really don't remember any specifics. Not one really. I mean, they were generally, you know, not to belittle things, but I mean, they were like petty kind of, you know, oh, let's, you know, hang a banner here, or oh, let's make sure, you know, we get recognized for Gay Blue Jeans Day and spread the word for, you know, what that's all about, and you know, kind of issues like that. But it was about awareness and making people aware and trying to change policy.
How many people generally attended the meetings?
Maybe about 15, 20 people or so.
And how often did they meet?
They weren't big meetings. Maybe once a month, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so you went to this, you went to OSU and you sought out the Gay Activist Alliance. You went to the first meeting. What happened after that?
Well, I was the new little chickadee in the meeting, so everybody, of course, wanted to, you know, talk to me and get to know me and impress themselves upon me. And, you know, Craig, of course, you know, was the same way. So that was kind of flattering. And so he invited me and like 3 other people over to his apartment, ostensibly to talk more policy. But it was just, you know, a little get-together, a little party, and you know, the folks that were there were coming on to me and stuff, but I wasn't, you know, I had been sexually active, you know, of course, for a while by then, but wasn't feeling something like that right at the moment with those folks. But I started dating Craig, and I think it was before the first quarter was up at OSU that I had moved into the apartment that he was in, and that was where the Stonewall number came from, the Stonewall phone number. And we shared 3 apartments together on campus. And it was during, you know, our time together that, you know, we helped start the Stonewall Union. And that was all in response to Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority coming to Columbus. And when that was happening, you know, the Moral Majority, they were going all across the country, organizing meetings in churches and making public announcements on the radio, trying to get their organization established. So there were, you know, a lot of radio advertisements on, and, you know, I don't remember if there were television spots, but I remember it was a big media push that the Moral Majority was making to, you know, come to their organizing meeting in Columbus. The Moral Majority is in town. We're going to meet at such and such a church, and this is where, you know, the Moral Majority, you know, will come to Columbus.
Would have this been in 1981?
I sure wish I could remember the exact year. It might have been 1980.
All right.
But 80 or 81. It would have been 1980 because I think 81 was the first parade, right?
I think Stonewall was founded in 81 and 82 was the first parade.
Ah, okay. All right. Well, then this probably was in 1981 then. Yeah.
All right.
Because that was the whole genesis of Stonewall. And Craig was working at a copy center at the time, and, you know, he and I put together a leaflet that, you know, we were able to make a few hundred copies of, and we leafleted the gay bars and some women's organizations, I think, you know, like the ACLU and now they were a couple of early contacts. And, you know, we basically tried to organize a demonstration or some kind of a response to the Moral Majority in front of their church. And what happened was an amazing turnout of people, but not for the Moral Majority. there were, I don't know, it was my first rally, that I had been to, other than when Nixon had come to town. So, I was impressed, and I don't really remember what the real number of people were that were there, but it seemed to me like, there were, a couple hundred people there. And the media was there, and because Craig had contacted them also. And inside the church, the moral majority meeting, I think maybe there were 7 people. We saw a lot of people driving by who were looking intently, who looked like they had come for this meeting, but decided to keep right on going when they saw the protests outside. And so it was really a tremendous success. Shut them down cold, and with that first step, Craig and I and some of the other white men that were involved in getting this rally together decided to keep things going, and that it was an important first step in promoting a real cause here. And that was where things were born, and meetings in the living room of our on-campus apartment.
Where was the apartment located at?
The first Stonewall office would have been on, I think it was 9th Avenue, near 9th and 4th, I think.
And that was the apartment that you and Craig lived in?
Mm-hmm.
All
Yeah.
right.
But no, I take it back. The apartment we lived in before that even was really the first place where Stonewall had some sort of an office. Because I remember distinctly now, we were in that apartment for the first gay pride parade that had been organized. Because I remember the neighbors, prior to that, they had seen me on television, with Stonewall's news program on public access, and they knew that we were gay, and so we had some run-ins and some problems with the neighbors. But after the first gay pride parade, when all of us had been on TV and there was a huge amount of media coverage, we had our house set on fire by we assumed the neighbors across the street, because we had an after party, to celebrate, and we're watching the media coverage and listening to music, and all of a sudden somebody smelled smoke, and it wasn't really the house had been set on fire, but all of the banners and things that people had taken to the parade were all they weren't unfurled, but they were rolled up and propped up on the porch because there was no place to put them. You couldn't bring them inside, but they had been set on fire, and so that was what was burning.
So this would have been?
This would have been on Chilcote Avenue, okay, which is for a little north of campus. Is it Hudson? Just a couple blocks before Hudson, I think.
All right. And this would have been the day of the first parade?
Yes.
Post-party?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. The leaflet that you created for the moral majority protest,
mm-hmm,
do you remember what it said on it?
No, I don't.
All right.
No.
Prior to deciding that creating an organization would be a good thing, creating Stonewall or whatever the vision was, besides the Gay Activist Alliance, were there any other gay groups in Columbus that you recall?
No.
All right.
There was a gay newspaper that was published, but that was basically a one-man operation.
And what was the name of that? Do you remember?
The Columbus News. That's probably not right. I don't really remember the name of it.
All right. Just setting the banners on fire,
mm-hmm,
were you guys able to just put it out on your own?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Did you call the police or the fire department or anything like that?
I'm sure we did. I mean, it wouldn't have been something that we would not have, alerted the authorities to. I don't specifically remember the police on that occasion, but I do remember them, when they came, when another time when the back door had been set on fire. And then another time when our neighbors' apartments were vandalized and we were threatened. And on that third visit, when we had been physically threatened, the police told us that we just needed to move. And that was their solution to the problem.
The having the back door set on fire, was that at the Chilcote address as well?
Yes.
And what happened? What was?
I wasn't actually there that day. That was Craig that was there, and apparently a bag of trash had been thrown up against the door and set on fire. So again, it was something that was discovered early. He was able to put it out, and the police were alerted, about it, but they of course didn't do anything. There wasn't any evidence saying, okay, these are the folks that lit the match. So they came, took another report, and went on their merry way.
The third incident that you described, what was it that happened there?
The third incident was very, very, very frightening. At the time, the block of apartments that we had lived in, we lived in like a row of townhouses, and there was an interracial couple that lived on one side of us, a white man and an Asian woman, and there were a couple of black women that lived on the other side of us. And of course, the two homosexuals in the middle just did not go down well with the rest of the street. We're predominantly Appalachian of background, I would assume, so it appeared. And when our African American neighbors had a party one night, had a lot of people over, men, women, music, and it was the night that Craig and I had also had, another couple of gay guys over to the house. We were getting ready to go out to a concert or a show or something. And while we were in our apartment, we started hearing all this, yelling and screaming. And when we looked outside, we saw a gang of young men and a couple of young women with baseball bats and iron bars and chains and other objects. And they were hurtling beer bottles at our African-American neighbor's apartment. And yelling, racial slurs. And it was unbelievable to me. I'd never really seen, racial animosity like that before. And it made me sick. And I was also frightened because, I saw what was out there, and I knew that anger could easily, have been pointed at my apartment or the apartment, next door to us, or anybody else that they didn't like. So we called the police. I'm sure, the other neighbors had all called the police too. And it took a good while for the police to show up, maybe 20 minutes or so. But when they showed up in force and sort of dispersed the crowd, and all of the people who had been at this party all, raced out of the apartment and into their cars and took off. It was time for us to head to the show, so we basically, thought that would be a good opportunity to leave also. And when we came back that night, it was just Craig and I, the two of us came back together, and our neighbor's apartment had been destroyed. Every window had been smashed out of it. Every stick of furniture that was in it had been smashed. It had been totally, totally destroyed. And as we're walking into our apartment, we hear, the cat calls, oh, the fags are back now. And what we had seen earlier in the evening proceeded to happen all over again, directed at us. And, so of course, we called the police. It was 45 minutes before they showed up this time. But when they showed up this time, they rounded everybody up and threw them in the back of a wagon and hauled them off for that evening and told us that we just needed to move. That was the problem. And that was the only advice that they could give us. So we moved very, very quickly. It was, it was within a couple of weeks we had left that place because it was an unbearable situation to be in. And we even had to have police escort us out of the neighborhood on the last load when we came to pick up the last of the stuff.
Were the people who were making the threats and causing the problems, were they prosecuted? Do you know?
No. No, they weren't.
So what did the police do with them?
Nothing. Kept them away, locked up somewhere overnight, but they were all back home the next day. The police did not see anything, so there were no prosecutable offenses. My neighbor's apartment was destroyed, but there were no witnesses to that. There were beer bottles, all smashed, on our front porch, but nobody was seen throwing a beer bottle.
And what happened to your neighbors?
Well, you're not going to move back into a house like that. Ida came back and, tried to salvage what she could, and it was gone. Just like that. I mean, that was overnight. I mean, I can't imagine how traumatized that woman still is today. I mean, it was just horrible. It was, everything was destroyed.
And that was when you moved to 9th and 4th?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And that was a much better neighborhood. At first, when we moved into the building, we were, stepping over, drug addicts and drunkards in the stairwell. But it was a small building. There were 4 units in it. And, I think, within, short order, we had, other gay folks that had moved into the building and had like a nice kind of little community in there. And I don't recall any problems there at all. None whatsoever, other than the landlord coming into the apartment and, snooping around when we weren't there, and complaining about Craig's cat. So it was a much different living experience there, certainly.
From your recollection, who were the people that were involved in first forming Stonewall?
I remember it was Craig Covey. It was Val Thogmartin, Craig Huffman, and their boyfriends at the time. So Craig's partner, Jenny, and Val's partner, Brian. Let's see, their guy named Rick Rommele came on board, very quickly afterwards also. And a few other people got involved. And then things started branching out very quickly. We got support from a couple of law professors at Ohio State that brought a lot of credibility to the organization. We started up, a gay cable program on public access, which was one of the first gay programs, I think, in the country that was, doing contemporary gay issues at the time. So that also, garnered a lot of credibility too. And So we set out to keep things rolling, try to, establish a means of raising funds and, determining, what the real mission of the organization is and what direction to take it in, and, what were the important issues to be addressed.
At the start, what was the purpose of the organization?
It was a gay rights organization to help foster understanding and acceptance of gay people and to work on achieving equality under the law. Because at the time, you could be evicted for being a gay person in Columbus. You could lose your job for being a gay person in Columbus, and have no recourse at all. That was just how it was. And so we set about trying to rectify those issues first. Things of bread and butter, issues that were important, and hearts and minds issues that we knew were the only way to achieve long-term success for us as a people.
How was it that you guys let people know that of this new organization? What was the method for?
Well, of course, we the gay newspaper that was in town. We were constantly sending them articles to publish and notices and things. I think eventually another gay paper started up, and we similarly worked that media. The gay bars that were in town were probably the biggest source of free publicity, because your target audience is right there if you're trying to raise money or make people aware of a gay organization that's in town. So we leafleted bars frequently and worked with bar owners to try to establish fundraisers. And at the time, that wasn't so easy because things like that had never been done before. Gay bars back in those days were generally not owned by gay people, weren't run by gay people. They were just a place where folks could take gay people's money. And a lot of times you really weren't treated well. They didn't really care about the community at all. It was just a financial thing. So to convince bar owners at that time that it was important to give back to the community that they serve, it was a real hard sell. And at the time, there were two main clubs in Columbus that were like right next door to each other. I think the Trade Winds is still there, and back then the other place was called Kismet. And neither of them were particularly keen on the idea of doing a fundraiser until another gay bar opened up in town. And it was a place called The Garage. And it was actually run and owned by a gay man. And he unfortunately also required a lot of prodding to participate in this. But eventually we were able to get a couple of fundraisers, one at the Garage and one at the Trade Winds. And
what did these fundraisers consist of?
It was basically, we would staff the door at the club, take a cut of the money, and do the usual leafleting things, trying to draw people to this event. So we sell it to them as, we're going to bring you, extra customers that night, but you need to support the cause and give us a cut of the money, and we'll work the door if you want us to. And,
What was a normal take on something like that for Stonewall?
Oh gosh, it was a very small amount of money. This is embarrassing because I think I was the first treasurer of Stonewall Union. So I kept the books for a number of years. But I remember, like some of the events pulling in, maybe a couple $100. If we had like, a $500 night, we were jumping up and down. Did we ever even have a $500 night? Maybe we jumped up and down for $300. It seemed like a lot of money back in the day. And it was just, small change financially, but it was enough to keep things going, office supplies. You can't keep stealing copies forever. And work on, getting paperwork filed to establish a 501c3 status for the organization, and, being able to work the media, certain props for television, programming. And it was all small amounts of money, but it was enough to keep the organization moving forward. And with each passing fundraiser that we would do, the owners of the gay clubs all being so close and watching their crowds go from one place to another, we were able to parlay that into sort of regular fundraising events at the clubs, and eventually branched out and did fundraisers at some of the other clubs that were farther out. I remember there was a place on East Main, I think, called the Ruby Slipper. It was this drag bar out there, but we did fundraisers out there also, and went to Summit Station, and eventually convinced the folks at the Kismet to let us do a fundraiser there, I think. And then a giant disco opened up in town. I don't even remember the name of that place, but it was, overnight, the place where everybody went to. And
are you referring to Imaginations?
That was it. Yeah, very good. So we had big.
That was probably about 1982, 1983, somewhere around in there.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, because I left town in 1984. So we had, the Mr. Columbus contest, and, kind of did some bigger productions and took some bigger hauls. And by this time, we had certainly branched out from just working, gay clubs, and we're trying to tap into, more established money that was in town, through, Rhonda and Doug, the law professors at Ohio State that had worked with us. It was a whole another group of people that were getting brought into this organization, the activities. Folks that, would never ever go to a gay club, or folks that, would never ever even, utter the word homosexual. But, these, of course, were people that we needed to reach also. And so we started doing in-home parties where, and it's, very much on the model of, how gay folks met, in the 50s, through potlucks and things like that. We would have small gatherings at somebody's home where they would invite, their personal friends and give us a few minutes to talk and explain what we were doing and ask for money. And we hosted many such events. Other bigger events, there was a big derby party that a gay man named Rick Brott used to host every year, where tons and tons of people would go, and people with a lot of money would go, and so we worked in eventually into those kinds of circuits and started having other types of fundraising events besides just leafleting bars and being activist. Tone down the rhetoric a little bit and try to appeal to people who get frightened by gay parades and things like that. And that was fairly successful. It got a lot of people involved who would never ever have considered getting involved with a gay rights movement, because all they would see is a bunch of radicals. But to be approached in a more professional manner, you know, to walk and talk the part, you know, and approach people in that way. It was, it made them think differently about the whole issue, and became an effective way of fundraising. And we would actually get people to pledge a monthly amount to the organization, you know, $15, even if you wanted to pledge. But of course, we aimed a lot higher, and that allowed us to, you know, have a reliable budget, you know, rather than relying on, you know, an event here or there. We actually were able to really start budgeting because we had a reliable source of income. And with that, we were able to expand things even further. We went before City Hall to try to overturn the job discrimination ordinances that were on the books then. I remember we failed, you know, the first time we went before the City Hall, because one of the City Council persons who had assured us behind closed doors that they would, you know, vote for the repeal of the law, changed their mind in public. But, you know, all through this, you know, we're gaining more exposure on television through mainstream media, and we're working through the system, you know, professionally, rather than being out in the streets, you know, yelling and screaming, which, you know, that certainly has its part and its place too. But to be able to reach, you know, the breadth of our community, you know, you have to appeal to a wider segment, and you know, you have to approach different people differently. And we, you know, became pretty good at reaching out to, you know, other people. We reached out across the state to other organizations. So, you know, we traveled to Cleveland a lot, and traveled to Cincinnati a lot. And I think both of those cities even established Stonewall chapters at some point. I don't know if they're still around or not. But I even remember going to Zanesville one morning to appear on a morning program there with a local talk show host, and just talk about what it's like to be a gay person. Wow, a gay person on Zanesville television. But, you know, it was all about being able to, you know, have that exposure and put a face on, you know, what a gay person really is, and, you know, be able to remind people that, you know gay people, you just don't know that they're gay. Because that was the message that had to be brought out to people then, because at the time, you know, gays were, people just really didn't know what a gay person was even. It was a very, very different time, where it was an issue that frightened a lot of people, and an issue that angered a lot of people, and an issue that a lot of people just wished would go away, even gay folks. Just a lot of gay folks just didn't want to hear it, didn't want to have anything to do with it. There was a gay city council person at one time, and we would see this person at the garage, the gay club, frequently with male companions, and would always try to convince this person that he needed to help, you know, other gay people. But he was a steadfast obstacle in anything that we ever tried to accomplish. And things like that were just incredibly frustrating, because, you know, here you see somebody who has the ability to step forward and help things along a great deal, and they, you know, refuse and run the other way, and just make things more difficult, and make things, you know, stretch the timeline out, you know, until, you know, there's real acceptance of people. So that was crazy frustrating.
You mentioned a moment ago that you were the first treasurer?
I'm quite certain I was, yeah.
Who were the other officers to begin with?
Well, Craig, of course. was the president of Stonewall Union. This was before paid staff or anything like that, of course. I think Craig Huffman, was vice president at the time. Either he or Val. I mean, they were the three, main people that were, really seen as the organization. I was just the trophy wife that, sat around and did the books,
Do you recall what the budget was back then?
Oh my gosh, budget. It would have been, in, the low hundreds of dollars then, it was just those, that first year or so, you're just trying to get by, trying to get established. Don't even know if something like this is going to work or be accepted. And I think maybe the last annual report I prepared might have had a $20,000 budget on it. It was all small money back then. The Pride Parade was probably one of the biggest fundraisers that we did every year, and that always, raised a lot of money for us. But I don't think we ever made over $2,000 on a parade ever. Now, all of these numbers are really suspect, because I really,
sure,
I'm just trying to remember some of these things and taking some wild guesses at them.
Why don't you tell me about the first parade? First of all, where did the idea come from?
It came from the TV crew. Craig and I, and the other people that were involved in getting the group organized, worked really hard to get subcommittees of people together who had an interest in doing something. And, once we got, secured time on the air for the public access, it became a matter of getting, people who, were like telecommunications students at OSU or people who had an interest in that. And I didn't really have a big interest on it, but I would frequently appear on the program and just give, the boring old gay news. And the folks that were involved in the television program, they did their own thing and they kept it moving forward very, very well. And this guy named Gary Thompson, I believe. And I think he was probably the person who first, really seriously brought up the idea of doing a parade and being able to mount one. And he was the guy who actually put together the very first gay pride float in Ohio, where he and another guy and a couple of women all had paper mache bodies of themselves made, holding hands, and were painted, the gay colors and standing up on the back of a flatbed wagon and pulled through town. That first parade, when it was, decided, let's go for this, and, things were secured with the city, everybody threw themselves into it, full-heartedly. I mean, it was a big effort, and everybody was just, so excited and so happy to be able to do something like this. Know that it was really going to happen in Columbus. So everybody worked really hard on that first parade. It was a great day. There were, not a whole lot of people there, but we were all in great spirit. I don't even think maybe there were 1,000 people at the first parade. It went from Goodale Park and marched down to the state capitol, and we had a small rally at the capitol. I remember Doug Whaley spoke, always a great speaker. I remember his speech so well because he came out and started shaming the people that had ringed our event with their biblical quotes, and were all telling us that we were going to burn in hell. And he got the crowd that was there participating in the parade to all shout in unison at these people and call them bigots. And he had them repeatedly call these folks bigots, maybe a dozen or so times in his speech. And next thing I knew, they were all gone. And the rest of the afternoon was rather uneventful. I heard that a couple of people, were attacked after the event on their way home. Of course, that was the day, we had our house set on fire too. So I'm sure there were probably, other incidents that I did not hear about. But all in all, it was a great day. And the sun shined and Columbus started to wake up. There were neglected citizens here who had real grievances.
How was it that the TV program came about?
Columbus always seemed kind of progressive when it came to cable television. Maybe Time Warner, being based here had something to do with it. But, of course, they were required by law to offer a certain amount of public airtime to what they call public access. And we simply applied for a slot, and they gave us one. So, okay, if you've got an hour of programming that you can produce, and so we went for it. They gave people some basic training. This is a studio, this is the camera, this is how you move and focus, and gave people some basic instruction up in the control room too, operating the lights and the sound and things like that, and then just sort of set us free. And I think there were certainly technical people around that we could have asked for advice, but it seemed to me it was all pretty much all Stonewall people that were doing everything. They were behind the cameras, they were behind the soundboard, they were in front of the cameras, they were writing the scripts that we were using. It was a community-based outfit all the way around, and everybody participated in some way. A lot of the people that were involved with the television program didn't have anything else to do with Stonewall Union at all. It was their television program, and that was what they wanted to be involved in, and that was fine. Everybody has a part to play, and so we were really grateful for the great cast and crew that they had there. They did a wonderful job.
What was the format of the program?
Oh, kind of boring. It's public access. So there would be interviews. There would be news. I would compile some news stories out of gay papers. There would be some editorial comment, usually given by Craig himself, and then some entertainment of some sort, sketches, or oh gosh, did they even give a cooking instruction one time maybe? I mean, just simple things. There weren't really any restrictions on what we could do other than it's got to be clean. And people were cycling in and out of positions there, so there was always people coming in with fresh ideas, like, hey, let's do this or do that. We used it as a fundraising vehicle too, where we would advertise events that we were hosting, talk about things that were going on, either at the State House or at City Hall, things that people should be aware about that, could affect their lives.
Well, how did the Columbus community, not just gay people, but the larger community, respond to the program?
I really don't know. Let's see. I don't even think anybody in my family ever even saw me on television. They were aware of it and had offers to see it, but so I don't know what kind of real broad appeal that it had, but it certainly did reach people who may not have otherwise, ever picked up a gay newspaper or ever gone to a gay event. I remember when I was senior, and professor that I had all quarter long. He was a decent guy. Class wasn't too hard. But I remember him on the day of the final, as he puts my exam down on my desk, he looks at me and says, "I saw you on TV last night. You need to look up from your script more often." And right there I knew that, well, gosh, this is somebody that, may not have ever, otherwise gotten any gay news or information. Yeah. Of course I'm wrong, but, at the time it just kind of hit me. It's like, wow, this, the news is getting out there. And I knew from just me going out to clubs and events that a lot of people did see the show, because people were always calling my name out and, generally trying to make me out to be ignorant, like playing that they knew who I was just from seeing me on television. And, do I know you? Who are you? So I knew that, there were a lot of people watching, and that what we were doing was having, an impact of some sort. And every avenue, every, inch forward was, a day closer to, being at the point where, we're just regular people like everybody else and thought of and treated that way.
We've talked a little bit today about some different rallies or parades or protests or whatever. Are there any others that you recall that took place that we haven't talked about yet?
Let's see. There were the parades and the events at the clubs, the events at people's houses, and other kind of big gay events. There were, of course, some political rallies too. Like if something was coming up at City Hall, we wouldn't turn out like a mob of people, but we would try to, pack the council chambers with supporters. We also, consciously early on in the organization made a big effort to outreach to other organizations, other progressive organizations, basically. So, we went to, ACLU meetings and meetings of, feminist organizations, especially trying to pay attention to some of the women organizations and minority organizations, because we knew that, this couldn't just be, 7 white men sitting around a living room and keep this thing going. It had to, broaden the diversity. So, getting women involved was very, very important to us, getting other people involved. So we tried everything. Sometimes we were met with open arms, and sometimes, we were kind of scoffed at and looked at askance, and but we did make a real conscious effort to reach out beyond just the core, gay white male constituency. So we, would attend other events of other organizations and things, and try to get our supporters to turn out and recognize that, our problems are everybody's problems too. And as far as like one particular event, nothing really stands out in my mind, but there were, a lot of fundraisers and living room parties.
In the time that you were involved in the beginning, do you recall any women or minorities being involved?
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, yes. I mentioned, Rhonda Rivera from OSU. Probably about half of the TV crew was women. Women got very involved with that early on. I think that was mainly through Gary's efforts. And Lamar worked on the program also. Gary had also brought him in, got him involved. So we did make an effort. Other than Lamar, I don't really remember other African Americans being, actively involved in the organization early on. Those were some of the organizations that when we would visit, that we were sort of met with not hostility, but the most cold shoulders, I suppose. Craig often, liked to invoke Martin Luther King when he was speaking to these groups too, and sometimes folks found that a little offensive. But we were out there trying, and it was one handshake at a time, $1 at a time, one set of eyes at a time to try to change minds and make things better.
I think you mentioned earlier in our discussion the importance of bars as being a place to connect with the larger community at that point in time. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about some of the bars. What were the bars that were around during those times? During those days,
I remember the Kismet. From before I even lived in Columbus. That had been around for a long time. Right around the corner from there, around the corner was the Trade Winds. The Summit Station was a women's bar that was farther north, a little west of campus, or east of campus. The Ruby Slipper, the drag club that was out on the east side. There was a place called Herbie's that was open for a while. The Garage I've mentioned. Infinity, was that big place?
Oh, Imagination?
Imaginations, okay. They all sounded like to me. And the Grotto, that was the other one. That was down on South High Street. There were probably others, but those are the ones that I remember. I remember the first fundraiser we did at Summit Station. That was kind of an interesting venue because we were mostly still, just a white male organization. And there was a straight woman from the Democratic Party who had gotten involved with us and liked hanging out with the boys. So at Summit Station, they had some entertainment scheduled as part of the fundraising event where Craig played a molester who was approaching women and saying crude and lewd things. And the crowd was becoming pretty hostile until Craig approached this woman, Cindy, and she pulled out a knife, and with a quick swing, she has a hot dog in her other hand that she's waving at the crowd, and the women just go wild. So that was an interesting fundraiser. I'll never forget that one. But eventually pretty much everybody that was involved in the gay drinking establishments came around to offering support of some sort or another. Others were, a lot slower to come around, but I think eventually, even the Grotto, I think, eventually came around and did something for us. I think they were the last holdout.
We've talked a little bit about your own personal interactions with the police in response to some things that were happening where you lived. Or are you aware of other issues with the police related to the gay community?
Oh my God! when I lived here, the Columbus Dispatch must have worked hand in hand with the Ohio Highway Patrol and other law enforcement agencies, because they would coordinate a spring offensive every year where one day in the paper the Dispatch would publish the names of 80, 100 men who had been arrested in this year's sting at rest stops or places where men would sometimes meet. And the Dispatch would list the names, the age, the address, place of employment for all of these people, as well as their crime, which is lewd conduct or whatever was pretty much it. And I never knew anybody that showed up on that list, but I can only imagine how many lives were just ruined by that despicable paper. Maybe you can report on police activities and police stings and things, but to publish people's addresses and places of employment was clearly just an attempt to ruin people and nothing else. Other issues at the time, I mentioned, housing and public accommodations, things like that. Those were issues that we were trying to address. We eventually, we founded a political action committee, Stonewall PAC, and that was to preserve the 501c3 status of the social services part of Stonewall, and then also, have a political branch that could be fully political and endorse politicians for races. And through the PAC, we would actually send out questionnaires to people that were running in races, statewide races or local races here in Columbus. And we would host events where we would try to get some of these people to speak and address the concerns that our community has. I remember Mike Stinziano was a state representative that represented campus at the time, and he actually came to Stonewall fundraisers at times. Some other politicians also came by, but I remember Mike as probably being the most supportive of the local politicians at the time. And through the results of questionnaires and things, we would do endorsements and have those printed in media that we would mail out to our mailing list and to gay newspapers around the state. Also would print on leaflets and leave those out at clubs and under people's windshields and things. So we tried a lot to influence things that way, at least make sure that the politicians knew that we were watching and trying to influence elections.
Any politicians you recall that were less than helpful?
Oh, well, gosh, those are easy to come up with. Chalmers Wiley, of course, was just, was a dead-on foe of the community, despite having very close members of his family as part of our community. Kasich. What's his name?
John
Kasich. Yeah. I'll never forget that one. He was certainly no friend of the community and continues not to be a friend of the community with his rants on Fox. We got a lot of lip service from local politicians, who felt our pain and blah blah blah, like to basically just talk to us and try to appease people and make them happy without really doing anything. That seemed to be the preferred method of dealing with us at first. Because, admittedly, it was a difficult position for a politician to even take in those days. It was really a different country then when it comes to the issue of gay people and how they were treated in community. So, how angry can I be? I'm still angry about it.